Blog Talk Radio.
Fulfill Radio, a voice you can trust. Broadcasting live presents Two Guys and a Bible with Don Preston and William Bell. Join us each week at 7 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Central as we bring you exciting, sound, challenging, and comforting messages regarding the end times. Thank you for tuning in today. Don Preston is the founder of Preterist Research Institute, or PRI. Don is a prolific author, having written and published 19 books, a host of audio and DVD studies, and is a debater and defender of the full preterist view. His websites are BibleProphecy.com, Eschatology.org, and DonKPreston.com. William Bell is the founder of AllThingsFulfilled.com Ministries and has a website bearing the same name, and has authored 3 books, audios, and DVDs. He has published hundreds of articles and recordings. And now, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Two Guys and a Bible broadcast with Don Preston and William Bell. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Two Guys and a Bible right here on Fulfill Radio, a voice you can trust. I am William Bell, getting in here just under the skin of my teeth, and we have Don Preston. And Don Preston.
That, ladies and gentlemen, is a humongous understatement.
Nevertheless, I had pressing business going on, but I got back here as quickly as I possibly could. At any rate, we are delighted to be with you tonight. Looks like we're in a good mood, and hopefully, I'm sure, as a matter of fact, we'll have a great message for you as well. It is good being back with Dr. Dunn, and looks like things are great on his side of the town. I know he's had some issues going on with a little bit of illness on his part and maybe some other issues, but let's check in with him and see how things are going. What's up, Don? How are you doing?
Yeah, things are going just really, really great, William. Just as usual, certainly busy. This is a time of the year when things start slowing down. People's attention begins to turn to the holiday season and being with family and all that kind of stuff, which is perfectly natural. And so it's been giving me a little bit more of an opportunity to spend some time with some other things, although I have been so wrapped up in trying to get one book finished so that I can spend some time on finishing my book on the Sabbath. I have promised myself, and I promised an awful lot of other people, that I was going to get focused, again, I should say, on my book on the Sabbath. And what's kind of interesting and ironic about that is that I have had, 4 or 5 different people over the last couple of days contact me and ask me if I had done anything on the Sabbath, that this was a really, really important issue to them. And one individual specifically, a Baptist minister, he said he's very, very close to being a full preterist, but the Sabbath issue is one that perplexes him. Matter of fact, he and I are supposed to have a phone chat on Thursday because he believes that keeping of Torah is very, very critical for us today. And of course, my first reaction to that, and I certainly don't mean any disrespect or dishonor to this gentleman at all. He certainly seems like a great guy, but my first reaction: how could anybody believe in covenant eschatology and at the same time believe that we are in any way bound to Torah? And so it's a little bit of a perplexity. And yet there are lots of people out there. I had a radio debate with a fella. We did it on this program. He's from up around Huntsville, Arkansas. and they call themselves the New Torah Observant Movement. And they offer animal sacrifices. They practice physical circumcision. I mean, on and on and on it goes. Yeah. So I've really been pushing myself to try to get this one book finished. As is so typical with me, I really started out to write this book entitled Circumcision and the New Creation. I really started out to write, a small booklet of maybe 65, 70 pages. Well, I'm currently up about 175 pages or more, and I'm not done. And so, it just, the more you get into it, the more you investigate, the more you study, then you just see more that has to be developed. And I was talking with someone about this book just the other day, and I said, well, I think a lot of people's initial reaction to a book on circumcision would be, why in the world would anybody want to write a Christian theology book on circumcision? That's such an outdated theological subject. So why are we worried about that? And yet, it is one of the most crucial of New Testament theological subjects. And it has to do with the new creation. It has to do with the observance of the law. It has to do with Sabbath. It has to do with the doctrine of marrying or giving in marriage. And I mean, on and on and on. The implications of a study of circumcision, while it may seem arcane to us today, that shows how far removed that we are from the understanding of the covenantal importance of the doctrine of circumcision in the first century, and to the entire subject of Christianity in the first century. I mean, this is really, really important stuff. So anyway, I've dedicated myself to try to get this finished just as soon as possible so that I can get back to my book on the Sabbath. And in its current form, it's already over 350 pages long. And I told my wife just recently, I said, this may very well have to be a 2-volume work because the more I got into it, the more I saw the interconnectedness with the feast days and the whole issue of Israel and the law, pardon me, and the Sabbath just kept coming up. So I can't wait to get back to it and get that book finished. I really believe that it's going to be a very important and very significant contribution, not only to the doctrine of the Sabbath, but let's face it, the doctrine of the Sabbath is a thoroughly eschatological motif and theme and subject. And let me illustrate that very quickly. I don't want to get too far afield here, but just just recently, I've been in controversy, as is usual, on Facebook with some former preterists who claimed they were, and most assuredly, some of them are simply Church of Christ people that have decided to join the fray, and they insist that the law of Moses was nailed to the cross. And one of the questions that I have posed over and over and over and over again is, if the law of Moses was nailed to the cross, then how could Paul say that the Sabbaths were still shadows of the good things to come? And how could he say a Sabbath rest remains for the people of God? Because the seventh-day Sabbath and all of the Old Covenant Sabbaths, I should say, were shadows of final salvation. They were foreshadowings of the resurrection. So if you say that the Sabbath has been annulled, or if you say that the Sabbath has been fulfilled, you're affirming the fulfillment of resurrection. You are affirming the reality of the new creation. You are affirming the fulfillment of all prophecy. And so I have asked these people over and over and over again, how could Paul be saying, which of course he wasn't, how could Paul be saying that the law of Moses was nailed to the cross and yet still be looking for the fulfillment of the Sabbaths? And William, not one single person has typed one single syllable trying to answer those questions.
Yeah, I was about to say, I was just thinking in my own mind. I said, well, there's the Passover for you.
Yes, indeed. I'm telling you, they have done the complete Passover. They haven't touched it. They haven't breathed on it. They haven't hit a keystroke on it. And I've told them several times, I've said, guys, if you've got the answer to this question about the passing of the law, if Colossians 2 is as clear-cut as you claim it is, surely you can answer this question real simply. Oh, mercy. They've responded by how much of a heretic I am, how much of a false teacher I am, how much of a cult leader I am. And of course, they don't leave you out, William. They also say that you're part of the cult leader as well. So you don't need to feel left out and alone on that. So anyway, I mean, it's been almost fun. It's certainly been revealing that when you just get down to the nitty gritty of challenging them on their doctrine, all of a sudden, the only thing they've got left is name calling.
Yes.
And that's it.
And they're very good at that.
Oh, they are extremely good at and of course, the admins of that one particular page, they allow that to go on, even though the rules of that particular Facebook page says no vulgarity, no personal insults, et cetera, et cetera. And yet one individual on there, he calls himself Glade by his last name. That's obviously not his real name, but he actually threatened to come to Ardmore and kill me.
What?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. He threatened to come to Ardmore and kill me. And so I reported it to YouTube. They put him on hold, put him on silence for 1 week, William. 1 week for a man who threatened to kill me. And then they allowed him to come back.
Wow.
And the admins of the page, they put him on silence for approximately a week. Then they allowed him to come back. So that shows you how concerned the admins of that page really are about any sense of decorum and Christian decency. You instead of kicking a man off of your board for threatening physical violence and threatening to kill somebody, you just simply put him on silence for a week. And when I challenged some of the other Church of Christ members on there of why they did not speak up against him, they didn't call him out. Not once did they call him out for his threat of physical violence. Finally, one of them said, well, okay, to satisfy Don Preston, this kind of verbiage is childish and immature, and it has no place. And I responded to them, and I said, really? Seriously? It's just childish and immature to threaten to kill somebody, and that's all you've got to say about this? I said, that says a world about you personally. And, of course, he wouldn't even continue, and he would not condemn that kind of language any further than what he had. And so that shows you the depth of what I call depravity. When you have people who call themselves Christians and they engage in that kind of hate and they engage in that kind of threats, and no one basically even calls them down about it in a serious, substantive manner, that tells you something about their own heart. And it's very disturbing.
Yeah, that's very true. It's just uncalled for that people would resort to that kind of, those kind of threats and probably willingness to carry it out. Who knows, just what they would do. And it also shows, again, just how inept they are at defending what they claim to believe and what they feel is true. If they can't defend it with, Scripture and with logic and reason, that they have to resort to trying to, literally destroy the messenger. I mean, we're accustomed to people saying things and misrepresenting and all of those things, but when it comes down to threatening with physical violence, it's really a different thing. And of course, they're not above it. I mean, I'm sure, because I've had a couple of examples where people wanted to get physical with me over over doctrine, and it's just sad to see them. And these are supposed to be refined gentlemen in the church, if you please, and yet when it comes down to it, we call it going to South Memphis, here. So yeah, they want to go to South or North Memphis when it comes down to those things.
Yeah, and again, it gets to the very point you're making. I'm reminded of an old saying among preachers, and I'll have to extend the metaphor here, but you remember the story, William, of a preacher who was making up his sermon, and he had his outline, and he came to this point in his outline that was really pretty weak. So out in the column beside that point, he wrote, "Weak point, get loud." So I'm reminded of that when I'm dealing with this kind of people. When they don't have a point to make, they get ugly. When they cannot make a biblical argument, then they, as it were, get loud by threats of violence. And that, I've said this a million times. When people realize that their doctrine is crumbling before their very eyes, then they start calling names. And that's precisely what I've seen over the last several weeks now on this one Facebook page with people who just they make such incredible self-contradictory arguments. One young man, he said Preston is so ignorant. It's beyond belief how ignorant Preston is. He claims that the destruction of Satan and the destruction of the power of Satan are synchronous events. And he said, how stupid can you get? And I thought, and then he went ahead to say, the Bible says that Christ appeared to destroy Satan through death. And he said, how would he destroy Satan? By destroying the power of Satan. What is the power of Satan? It is the law. And he cited 1 Corinthians 15. And I'm going, oh my goodness gracious. So I wrote back and I said, I guess you just completely and totally destroyed yourself. The power of death is sin, or the sting of death is sin, and the strength of sin is the law. That would be destroyed at the resurrection. The resurrection is when Satan would be destroyed. Therefore, the destruction of the law, which is the strength of sin, and the destruction of Satan are synchronous. And that's when he wrote, can you believe how stupid Preston is? He said, Satan was destroyed at the cross. And I'm going, what? So I wrote back and I said, well, let's see if you believe that or not. How about Revelation chapter 20, 10 and following? When is Satan destroyed? Oh, at the end of the millennium. So now you have said Satan is destroyed at the cross. The power of Satan is destroyed at the cross. That means the millennium ended at the cross. Is that really your position? Well, then he came back and said, I never said any such thing. That's total misrepresentation. So I just copied and pasted his own words. And I said, I'm sorry. This is what you said. You've destroyed your own doctrine right here on this page for everyone to see. And so once again, he launched off into his diatribe, of name calling, of how heretical I am, how stupid I am. I don't understand the difference between the law and the gospel. I said, well, here's what I understand. I said, I understand that you said that the power of death would be destroyed at the time of the destruction of the law. That would take place at the resurrection. And I know and I understand that Satan would be destroyed not at the cross, but at the end of the millennium. So I understand perfectly well, contradicted yourself in every way imaginable, and that you're simply trying to extract yourself from these fatal self-contradictions. And so once again, he goes off into this rambling, vitriolic, hate-filled diatribe of how stupid and how ignorant Preston is, and never addressing the self-contradictions. So, and that gets to be rather, shall we say, humorous to a certain point, but on the real side of it, it's so sad that you have somebody so entrenched in tradition, so entrenched in presuppositions, so entrenched in his animosity toward preterism that he literally refuses to acknowledge, even though he typed it out, even though it's copied and pasted, even though it's simply undeniable, he refuses to admit what he said, and literally lies and says, I never said what you said. I never said that. That's a lie. And then you copy and paste it once again, and it's right there in front of his face. And he says, well, you just simply don't understand. And, of course, you know, at some point you have to say, well, no, I don't understand your doctrine, and I can't understand your doctrine because it's so contradictory. It's just, it makes no sense whatsoever. So, like I said, in a sense, it's slightly fun. In another way, it's just sad to see somebody with that kind of animosity and that kind of closed-mindedness. And I'll finish up on this in these anecdotes. He had given Hebrews chapter 2, 14 and 15. As far as the children are partakers of flesh and blood, he also himself likewise took part of the same, that through death he might destroy him who had the power of death. Well, he pointed out, he made the argument that it was at the cross that Christ destroyed death. I said, and to go back over the territory I just covered, you can't believe that because you don't believe Satan will be destroyed until the end of the millennium. So you're arguing on the one hand that Christ destroyed Satan at the cross, and on the other hand, you argue that it will not be destroyed until the end of the millennium. You're contradicting yourself. So I said, your argument fails to consider that the author of Hebrews is saying that it was through the power of the cross. It was by means of the cross that he would. And I said, let me point something out. He said that through death he might. And I said, that's in the subjunctive mode. And I said, the subjunctive means it's a possibility, it's a hope for, it's a future thing. And he wrote back and he said, don't try to tell me that you understand the Greek. There are many nuances to the Greek. And I said, tell you what, prove me wrong. I challenge you. I double dog dare you me wrong on the subjunctive. And he came back and he goes, well, I never said that the subjunctive doesn't have the possible element to it. I'm just simply saying that you're perverting it. I said, prove it. I said, your own doctrine demands that the subjunctive is futuristic in Hebrews 2 because Paul said that through death he might destroy the devil. You say the devil will not be destroyed until the future. That's the future element of the subjunctive of Hebrews 2, 14 and 15. So show me where I am wrong. and he came back with a quote undoubtedly provided to him by Sam Frost. The problem was the quote actually said present subjunctive and the aorist subjunctive both indicate futurity. Well, the subjunctive in Hebrews 2:14 and 15 just happens to be the aorist subjunctive. So I said, I copied and pasted the quote that was almost undoubtedly given to him by Sam Frost. And I said, by the way, thank you so very much for the quote that says the present subjunctive and the aorist subjunctive both indicate futurity, because that's exactly the point I'm making. So your own quote provided to you proves my point. And I had to leave and do more important stuff and to correspond with people who have some degree of integrity. So I don't know what, if anything, he posted in response to that. So, I mean, everywhere they turn, they entrap themselves.
Well, they can't help that once they take a stand against the truth.
That is exactly right. So anyway, that's how my last several days have gone, William. dealing with these people. I've tagged you. I figure you're still so busy you hadn't had an opportunity to log on and to read much of that, if any of it. But I think you'll find it interesting if you happen to get on there and read any of it.
Yeah, I'll get on there a little bit after the call tonight. I haven't had much time to do that. I finally got, a video loaded up to YouTube the other day, and I got another one that I'm going to publish. So gradually getting back into it. I've got to get back to the book that I was writing on, Matthew 10. I was editing it just prior to going to Ghana, and just kind of dropped it at that point. So now I got to pick it up and try to get that done, get it out of the way so I can work on something else. It's slow going for me writing these books, but at the same time, I think it'll add a little bit of value. So I want to get that one done and then move on to some other things that I want to do, as well as, catch up on the rest.
Yeah, very, very good. Well, all right, folks. Boy, I'm having a lot of trouble my throat tonight. It's time for us to get back into Ezekiel, and I thought we would move on from chapter 43. We dealt with some really, really fascinating stuff there in that chapter, dealing with the moral, ethical aspect of the chapter. And so we come to chapter 44, and I've got to tell you what, folks. I make no bones about this. And in a way, I apologize. In a way, I don't know whether to apologize or not, because here's the deal. Dictators have for centuries struggled with Ezekiel 44. Now, our dispensational friends tried to tell us, oh, well, it's no problem whatsoever. But it is. It presents an insurmountable problem for dispensationalism. And I have presented some of those problems against dispensationalism in public debates with dispensationalists. And after one debate with a dispensationalist, my opponent was asked how the debate went, and he said, I am getting whipped. That's how it's going. He actually was a little bit more explicit than that. It was really funny. But anyway, but I actually used Ezekiel 44 against him. He thought that was his chapter. And this gets back to circumcision, and we'll get to it hopefully this evening. But when I turned this chapter on him and used the doctrine of circumcision against him, he realized Ezekiel 44 is not the friend of the dispensationalist, not any way, shape, form, or fashion. And on the other hand of that, Ezekiel 44 presents some really daunting challenges if it is taken as an application of the Messianic Temple. Now, I shared with you last week how in the ancient intertestamental period of time, in the pseudepigrapha writings, the apocryphal writings, there was a great deal of variety of positions held by those apocryphal writers insofar as the interpretation of Ezekiel 40 to 47 is concerned. There were those who took it in a strictly spiritual sense. There was those who took it in a strictly physical sense. There were those who took it in a mixture of both, saying that, for instance, the Qumran community, as I shared last week, took the position that it applied to the Qumran community as the temple of God, a spiritual temple. But then when the kingdom would come, when Messiah would come, whip the Romans, and establish the kingdom on earth, that this temple predicted in Ezekiel 40 to 47 would be a literal physical temple. Now, that just simply goes to illustrate how difficult these chapters are. And I don't mind telling you at all. That's why I said, on the one hand, I would almost apologize for not having a better explanation. On the other hand, I can't say that I've got any better explanation for chapter 44 than anyone else. I'm still working on it. I'm still striving to understand it. But there are some things in it that just cause me to scratch my head and to say, I don't have that figured out yet. Ezekiel 44 was almost undoubtedly, now I haven't been able to document this. I want the audience to know. I haven't been able to find any proof positive that the Judaizers of the first century utilized Ezekiel 44. But I strongly suspect, and again, this is Don Preston's personal opinion. Scratch it up as personal opinion. Discard it if you want. But I personally strongly suspect that along with Isaiah 52, 1 and 2, and Ezekiel 44, these verses served as the ground and the source for much of the Judaizers' teaching that a person who had become a Christian had to keep the law of Moses and to be circumcised in order to be saved. So, with that said, that's jumping ahead just a little bit. But let me ask this question here, William, not to put you on the spot overly much, a little bit maybe, but not too much. Have you ever really delved into Ezekiel 44 and tried to solve some of the mysteries of this chapter? Hello, William.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was talking. I had my mic muted. Quite frankly, no, I have not. We're studying Ezekiel now. We haven't quite gotten this far, and I will be looking into it. But in terms of the problems that you are presenting at this point, I have not. So I'm interested in seeing, kind of where this is going as I look at it for future consideration myself.
Well, I tell you what, since you're studying it, let's delay our study on this program until you get it figured out, and then you can come on here and you can set us all straight. That's my solution to the problem. Oh, goodness. Okay. Oh, goodness. Laughing is not good for my throat. Okay. Well, I tell you what. Let's begin. We won't jump right into the issues that are of such concern, that are so perplexing. We'll begin with the very first part of the chapter. Then he brought me, that's the angel, brought me, that's the Son of Man, that's Ezekiel, back to the outer gate of the sanctuary, which faces toward the east, but it was shut. And the Lord said to me, This gate shall be shut, it shall not be opened. No man shall enter by it, because the Lord God of Israel has entered by it, therefore it shall be shut. Now that indicates, obviously, since Yahweh's Shekinah glory had entered through that gate, evidently, that meant it was holy, it was sanctified, and was therefore off limits to the people, except the most holy ones. Now, what's fascinating, of course, is that we go back to Ezekiel chapter 10, and we find how the Shekinah glory cloud departed from the temple. Departed, not entered, departed. Went over to the Mount of Olives, and then departed from there. And what's fascinating, of course, about that is that when Jesus in Matthew 23 was in the temple and spoke the 7 woes against the temple and against the temple authorities, he left that temple after saying, Your house is left to you desolate, just like Ezekiel had declared impending disaster on the temple of 586 BC. Jesus, the second real Son of Man, Ezekiel is about Ezekiel called the Son of Man. Jesus, the Son of Man, departed from the temple and went over to the Mount of Olives, and there gave his lengthy discourse about the coming disaster and destruction of the temple, just like in Ezekiel, the Son of Man continued his condemnation and his prediction of the Jerusalem temple. The parallels between Ezekiel as the Son of Man and the predictions of the fall of the temple, the predictions of the coming destruction of Jerusalem, etc., those parallels with Jesus in Matthew 23 and 24 are really quite profound. And there have been extensive studies of this done by some major scholars down through the centuries. And so these are parallels that that are not imaginary. These are parallels that scholars have recognized literally for centuries and developed so extensively. And by the way, I would also point out that the parallels between the book of Ezekiel and the book of Revelation have also been investigated and adduced by scholars throughout the centuries. And I want to tell you what, folks, these parallels between the book of Ezekiel and the book of Revelation are some absolutely dynamite parallels. When you see them delineated in well, you could put it in chart form to be sure, but pardon me, there are. Let me see here. I believe, if I remember correctly, there are something like 40 parallels between Ezekiel and the book of Revelation. Seems like that's what I've read. Now, just think about that, folks. 40 parallels. And by the way, many of these parallels are established by the verbal similarities, the verbal parallels, not only the thematic and motival, but I mean the verbs that are used, the actual language. It is as if Revelation is quoting. It's most assuredly echoing the book of Ezekiel to let the reader know where the apocalypse is being drawn from. And so that makes it even more powerful. But again, the same thing can be said of the parallels between Matthew 23 and 24 and the book of Ezekiel. And by the way, this shouldn't surprise us in regard to Revelation, because as R.H. Charles said, and as Charles Worth both, they both said, when it came to the book of Revelation, or to back up a little bit, they noted how Matthew, Mark, and Luke all record the Olivet Discourse and a prediction of the fall of Jerusalem. John, the Gospel of John, does not contain the prediction of the Olivet Discourse. But when you come to the book of Revelation, Charlesworth observed, the book of Revelation is John's Olivet Discourse in expanded form. That is exactly and precisely true. So, here we have this irony at work throughout the Scriptures. And we have this motif of the Lord departing through that gate, through that eastern gate, and the Lord having entered in through that eastern gate. And, William, am I wrong here in saying that this passage is probably the passage that an awful lot of people, and I know this is true in Jerusalem of modern day. I have read it of the modern day Jews, that it's the belief that when the Messiah comes, he will enter in to Jerusalem through the eastern gate. Is that your understanding, that Ezekiel 44 is probably the source of that?
I would think that is the case. That I don't have any other source that I could see that is the case. So I would think that this is probably where that originates from.
Yeah, it's the very best passage, as it were, that I have been able to come up with that mentions entering into the gate and the Lord entering into the gate through that eastern gate, and therefore man was not to enter into it because this is the gate of Messiah. This is the gate when Messiah comes. And by the way, it's going to be interesting. This is an aside. This is a digression. But I have my friend in Israel who is this Hebrew scholar, and he sent me a private text message on Facebook about 3 days ago, and I just found it today. But anyway, he was saying that some while back he had produced a book on the sacrificial system of Israel and the temple. And he said it's such a complex subject and one that most people do not understand, and yet, the sacrifices were given for the benefit of the people, for the blessings of the people, and that, again, he had written this book, and he just now gotten back to editing that book and to trying to finalize it. Well, I wrote back, and I thought, well, he's liable to take a good bit of umbrage to this, but I'm going to say it anyway because he's always expressing his beliefs, so I have a right to express my beliefs. So I said, I wrote back today, and I said, well, the sacrificial cultus has always been a real fascination to me, but I must confess a great deal of consternation and confusion. I've never been able to fully understand it. It's been so complex. And that when I read Torah, I just find so much that makes my head spin. I said, but of course, from my perspective, that is the Christian perspective, I said, I rejoice in the fact that Jesus is the ultimate sacrifice. He is our Passover. And as John the Baptizer said, behold the Lamb of God that takes away the sins of the world. I said, so I rejoice in that, and I don't feel compelled that I have to understand everything there is to know about the physical cultus. I haven't checked to see if he's responded yet. So, we'll see if he responds, and obviously in the Jewish mindset, it has always been considered historically. It has always been considered so offensive that one would die on a tree, on a cross. Because as Deuteronomy 21:23 says, cursed is everyone who hangs on a tree. Because that was the criminal. That was the sinner. That was the man that was worthy of death. And so for it to be suggested which is at the heart and the core of the Christian doctrine. For Christ to willingly suffer death on the cross is a great offense to the standard traditional Jewish mentality. But hey, it's got to be said. I mean, that's the heart and the core and the foundation of Christianity. He died in our place. He bore our sins in his body on the cross. And so I'm not going to back off because of his sensibilities, because he needs to hear this. He's a great guy. I love corresponding with him. But he needs to hear about the sacrifice of Jesus as the end of all of those old covenant sacrifices. We'll see how he responds.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. I'd be interested in hearing what he has to say on that, because I know you've corresponded with him over the years, and I'm sure you've touched on matters like this before.
Yeah, we touched on some of it, and he's always been very gracious. He's never seemed like he got offended, and and so I think today was maybe the most direct that I had shared that fundamental Christian doctrine with him in the way that I did. And so we'll see. We'll see if he just goes stone dead silent, or whether he says, well, yes, but in the Jewish mind, blah, 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 and maybe give me an opportunity to share with him a few thoughts from the book of Hebrews, maybe. that might just possibly be relevant to this entire discussion. So anyway, back to Ezekiel chapter 44. And, boy, we're running out of time here. But anyway, as for the prince, now this is, in the Hebrew, this is the Nazi, the president, the prince. Because he is the prince, he may sit in it, and that's set in the door. He can't enter, but he may sit in it to eat bread before the Lord. He shall enter by way of the vestibule of the gateway and go out the same way. So there was a side entrance in the vestibule. Not allowed to go directly into the door, but there was a vestibule with a side entrance. Then he brought me by way of the north gate to the front of the temple. So I looked, and behold, the glory of the Lord filled the house of the Lord, and I fell on my face. Now, here's a very, very important issue. Remember, as I've already pointed out in chapter 10, the Shekinah glory cloud departed from the temple. God was no longer there. And, of course, in a really, really significant text from Ezekiel chapter 10, the Lord talked about Judah and Jerusalem being scattered among the nations. But he said, wherever you go, I will be with you there as a sanctuary. Boy, that's incredible. Because the Lord was saying, you know what? I know that this temple, I know that Zion is supposed to be the only proper place to worship the Lord. But guess what? I'm going to destroy it. And where I send you into captivity, I'm going to be your sanctuary there. That was, without any shadow of a doubt, a foreshadowing of the reality of Christ. He is with us anywhere and everywhere, like we talked last week, dwelling in the presence of God, being part of the temple of God. Revelation 21 says, in describing the New Jerusalem, it says, there is no temple there because God and the Christ is the temple. So here, any and all reference to a physical edifice is wiped off the books. And we are just emphatically told that God and His Son are the temple in which we dwell. That gets back to Ezekiel 47, the last couple of verses. And it shall be said of that place, God is there, dwelling in the presence of God. And William, I was sharing some of the comments that you and I had on the program last week with a guy on the phone this morning, and he's relatively new to the concept of preterism. He came from a dispensational background, but he's out of that now. He is really seeing some of the very, very powerful connections with covenant eschatology. And yet, as he said, he has lots and lots of questions.
Mm-hmm.
And he ever so briefly touched on Ezekiel. And so I said, well, let's talk about Ezekiel 47, the last two verses. I said the whole point, the entire point of that temple city discussion is, it shall be said of that place, God is there. And I shared with him what I had said last week. One of the most profound changes that has ever taken place in my life is to come to the realization that we as children of God dwell in the presence of God every single day of our life. Not just when we gather to worship on Sunday, but every single day of our life. We are dwelling in the presence of God. And I was sharing that with this fellow. I said, these are profound thoughts. And I said they have to do with the fact that under Torah, you had a certain amount of laws that you had to keep. You had to keep them perfectly. You had to go to the temple, that physical temple, and there offer your sacrifices. That's the only place you could offer your sacrifice. But I said, under Christ, in the New Covenant world, we dwell in his presence every single day. He is our temple. And I said, dwelling in his presence is not keeping a checklist of laws perfectly. And I said, now, mind you, I'm not negating or disparaging the importance of obedience to the Lord, because Paul said in Romans chapter 6 that when we obeyed the Lord from our heart, it's then that we were set free from sin. So I said, I'm not negating the importance of obedience to the Lord by any shape, form, or fashion. I'm simply pointing out that there is a vast difference between a mentality that says I have to be perfect, I have to keep every rule, every law, every bylaw, every jot, every tittle, versus I dwell in his presence, he is my God, I am his child. I want to please him to the very best of my ability. And I told this fellow, I said, I don't know what your family life was like, but I do know this. I said, dwelling in the house of my father, if I broke one rule, that didn't mean that he kicked me out of the house. But I said, I was raised in a religious environment that essentially said, you break one rule and God kicks you out of the house. You gotta walk down the aisle and ask for forgiveness for breaking one.
Looks like we lost Don. Let's see what happened here. Yep, ladies and gentlemen, we did lose him, so maybe he will call back in just a few minutes. He was talking about how people break a single rule and then they're cast out. And, of course, I'm totally familiar with that concept that some, even in the church, have taught, and we're very serious about it. But let's get him back in.
Yeah.
All right, Don, you're back.
Yeah. I actually had my back turned to the computer, and I just heard this funny sound, and I look around and realized I had been kicked off. So at what point was I terminated there, William?
Well, you was just saying that, where this one rule, you kicked out and you had to come down the aisle, et cetera.
Yeah, and I thought it was very, very interesting that as I shared these thoughts with this gentleman, that the phone went a little bit silent when I came to a break, and directly he goes, you know what? That's very, very profound, because he said, I was raised in that identical kind of environment. One rule, one rule violation, and you're out. So he said, I've never really heard it expressed quite like that. So he said, that's really quite a profound thought that you just shared with me there. I said, well, it's been a profound revelation to me, a profound realization to me about dwelling in the presence of God, that's what this entire concept of temple is all about, dwelling in the presence of God. So I'm really looking forward to spending some more time communicating with this guy and seeing where he's at in his journey, because he seemed like a very, very sharp guy, and he seems to have already come a fairly good way in his studies. But obviously, nonetheless, he has an awful long way to go by his own admission. So we will see. We'll see how it develops, and that brings me to another guy. I've also been corresponding extensively lately with a young minister, and he is likewise he's from a congregation that is a mixture of dispensationalism and amillennialism, postmillennialists. I really don't know how that. I don't know how they do that, to be honest about it. Maybe they have to do the Passover when it comes to discussions of eschatology. But he told me now for several months. And, he told me, he said, I've been introducing a lot of these concepts. He said, I've been sharing them with my elders especially. And he said, so far there are open minds, there are open hearts, there's a willingness to listen, there's actually an eagerness to learn more. There are great questions being asked, and there's no animosity, there's no resistance. So he said, everything's going well so far. And so we can hope and pray for that young man, that continues, that the congregation and his leadership continue to exhibit some open-mindedness. But I mean, that kind of gets back to the fact that, as we know, things are happening everywhere. The work that you did in Ghana, the work that is going on everywhere around the world as we speak tonight, it just speaks to how wonderful the power of God is and how powerful the Word of God is when it comes to accomplishing His purposes. And with that, we are out of time, ladies and gentlemen. We want to thank you for joining us here on Two Guys in a Bible on Fulfilled Radio, a voice you can trust. As always, William, great to be with you. And with that, I will say good night. God bless.
Thank you for joining the Two Guys in a Bible radio broadcast. On behalf of Dunn Preston and myself, we'd like to say have a very pleasant day, and may God bless. Until next time, we'll see you on Fulfilled Radio, a voice you can trust.